Alex O'Connor, he came from an angle when it came to whether or not Jesus pre-existed, and he used an argument that surprised me.
Dave has already talked about the angel of Yahweh, and there is the suggestion that the angel of Yahweh is Jesus. That doesn't seem to make much sense to me. For a start, if you turn to Hebrews chapter 1, the very first verse says, "In the past, God spoke to our ancestors through the prophets at many times and in various ways. But in these last days, he has spoken to us by his Son." In these last days. If Jesus is the angel of the Lord, way back in Exodus, the story of the Exodus, why is it that Hebrews says he's only spoken to us through the Son in the last few days?
Like Hebrews chapter 1 is one of my favorite chapters. It's really the last place you want to go to try to prove that Jesus is not God or that he did not pre-exist his human birth. Hebrews, the book of Hebrews, period, is the last place you want to go. And here's why. What's going on, guys? So this is a question for Alex, man. How you doing, man?
Hey,
you mentioned,
God logic.
Yes, yes, sir. You mentioned in Hebrews 1 where, God is speaking, or God spoke to our, through prophets. Now he speaks to us through his Son. And you're saying, where was Jesus then, back then? He should have been active. And so, regarding Hebrews, I just want to read you this and get your thoughts on this, okay? It's Hebrews 11. Regarding Moses, it says, by faith, Moses, and I'm going to just skip down to 25 and 26 for time, choosing rather to be mistreated with the people of God than to enjoy the fleeting pleasures of sin, he considered the reproach of Christ greater wealth than the treasures of Egypt, for he was looking to the reward. So how is it that Moses can be considering Christ's disapproval if Christ wasn't around for him to disapprove?
In this instance, Hebrews is probably presenting Jesus as, I don't know about the angel of Yahweh, but certainly we're looking at a high Christology in Hebrews, yeah.
So close.
But, yeah, I see what you're saying. For what it's worth, I have no problem saying that Hebrews has a high Christology. That's kind of not an issue to me. But I think it is interesting to suggest that as a retort to the idea of the angel of Yahweh being Jesus, I think that is an excellent point. Yeah.
This means that Christ pre-existed, and it was in the presence of Moses. Moses was aware of Christ, was in his presence, and feared him, had a respect and a reverence for Christ before we get Christ being born of a human.
So this video of Alex Connor Christians believing that he was stumped by this young man, actually is just people not even understanding what Alex's response was. Basically, Alex's response was that the book of Hebrews does have a high Christology, and I will explain that in a minute. But even more so, he was saying that this really had nothing to do with the subject matter by which I was speaking of. Christians love to do this. They love to change the subject to fit whatever narrative that they desire to have the outcome to be. He was talking about the fact that Yahweh, that Jesus being the angel of Yahweh, is improbable and impossible, and doesn't demonstrate Jesus being active in the Old Testament. Now, you can somewhat draw a line to what the gentleman is saying about how in the book of Hebrews, it talks about Moses being in fear of Christ or being conscious of Christ. But yet there is nothing in Deuteronomy or Leviticus or Numbers or Exodus that would demonstrate that Moses, in what they believe, now Christians believe Moses wrote those books, but Moses never spoke of any Christology whatsoever. None, no Christology at all. But yet you are willing to take the book of Hebrews, which is written theoretically right before or right after the fall of the temple in around 70 AD, or CE, as I like to say, because I know Dominique does not apply to me. But you're looking at that time frame that Hebrews was written by an unknown author, I might add. Although some say that it's possibly written by Paul, or, and we know Paul didn't exist, but written by Paul or one of Paul's disciples. The book of Hebrews have no authorship at all. Have no idea who wrote it. Then on top of that, it is well established in scholastic circles that the book of Hebrews is a letter being written to Jews who have converted over to Christianity. So the book has a high Christology, as Alex was saying, because the book is dedicated to helping Jews who have converted over to Christianity to try to let go of the old covenant by which they were under during Moses. And in doing so, it kind of goes against some of these sacrifices and the laws and things of that nature, even though Jesus is quoted as saying that not one tittle or iota from the law will be taken away. But the book of Hebrews is basically making it easier for Jews who converted over to Christianity. And most likely the letter was written to Jews who were living in Rome and not Jews who were living uh, in Judea, in order to help them to integrate into the Roman society without having to practice the current mode of Judaism at that time frame, not having to sacrifice animals, not having to do many of the rituals and keep the high holy days and the festivals of Judaism, so that you can appear more pleasing to the Romans and therefore not be oppressed as much or having yourself singled out, and really creating more of a separation between Jewish and Christianity, Jews and Christians. But this is mainly targeted towards Hellenistic Jewish Christians in Rome. So therefore, what the book tries to do is harmonize the idea of Jesus with Moses, saying that Moses was in fear of it. Now, I want you to think about that for a second. Someone writing Hebrews, talking about what Moses thought, what Moses felt, what his line of thinking was, his his actions or inactions are, would be like me today trying to write a book telling you what Malcolm X was thinking, what Abraham Lincoln was thinking. When Abraham Lincoln wrote the Emancipation Proclamation, he had within his mindset that what he wanted to do was invoke the spirit of Martin Luther King and allow for total integration of the Black population into America, desegregating it, because he felt the energy of Martin Luther King of desegregation, so that there could be equal treatment and everyone will be identified by their character and not their skin color. And because Abraham Lincoln was in that mode of thinking, he knew that there would be some resistance from the Union, from America at that time frame. Therefore, it was also within his plan to establish Liberia as a free state for the former slaves to be able to leave America and create their own state, followed up by Monroe, who promoted this ideal even more so because he had the the Martin Luther King / Malcolm X mindset. How can I write that today, inferring my thoughts of what I have come to know about our history and the thinking and the ideas of Malcolm and Martin, and imply that Monroe and Lincoln had those same thought processes? This is Christian harmonization in order to make their book fit, but more importantly, to make it easier for the Jewish Christians in Rome who were reading this, which just makes it all bullshit that people try to think that this was divinely inspired. So what do you guys think? And always remember, you have to free yourself to be yourself, because your greatness is non-negotiable. Good journey, good vibrations.